Okay, so I'm going to break down this curtain rig and show how it's set up and why. Okay, so the first thing you see when you play, there is bones being animated, right? This is a bone rig here, and these are controllers to control the curtain. And these controllers are set up to drive shape keys, which I'll show in a second, right? But if I turn the animation off, the automatic keyframe off, you'll see what these controllers do. Let's look at that first. So the first controller is drag dynamics. And what that does is it creates a drag. It activates the drag shape key, which is basically just that. Like in classic animation terminology, drag meaning that physics, something will drag along as you pull it, the gravity and the inertia of the thing being pulled, it kind of drags a bit. And then if you go the other way, it's called follow through. So I just called it through. So basically it's like when the curtain stops, it'll kind of swing a little bit. So it's basically drag and through. So you get this kind of swaying, right? Now this is the way I designed the shape key. You could design it any way you want. And that's probably a key component to this, is you can really tweak these shape keys to be what you want. But I just did it fairly simple like that to show some hanging there. Okay, and the other bone that is being animated is the sway dynamics. And what that is when you move something, it will tendency to, what's the physics term for that? When there's energy being applied to something, there's always going to be a reaction to that energy. And if something is being held down here, up here I should say, there's energy driving through this cloth by moving it with by moving these chains here, these hooks, I should say. Like in a real curtain, it'd be like a cable that ran through it that was pulling these hooks along, right? These rings along, right, that are hooking into the curtain. Anyway, so when you have something that is causing a force to go in one direction, and it can't dissipate all of that force in any other way, it will just find a way to kind of shake that force off. And one of the ways it will do is sway. Like if it was to stop, not only would it sway forward and backwards, but it would sway in and out like this. And when it's moving along, it's going to do that too. It's getting friction, and that friction is traveling through the object, and you're getting some sway. So these are just two main ways to give it a little bit of life, more realism, as it moves through space, right? And then the final bone is simply the bone that moves it through space. So as you pull this along, the shape key travels along the curve, right? Okay, so now let's look at what these shape keys are. All right, so these are all the shape keys that I have. So I've closed, which is basically the same thing as basis. By default, you'll get a shape key that's named basis to remind you that that's, the way the shape looks without doing anything to it. So that's, if I go into edit mode, you'll see that the basis shape key is everything is straightened out, right? So now I created this by using an array, but the first thing that I did was I checked the array as it moves along the curve to see if I had it long enough and I had enough segments to it. This is a model that you could do any way you wanted, any kind of shape and detail that you want to add to it. Once I got the array, I applied it, and then I had this basic shape here, which was all these rings lined up in a long straight path. Basically, this is how it would be in the real world. It would just be a long piece of fabric, not even really bent like that, but it would be slightly bent. In the real world, of course, it would be completely straight. I didn't do it that way. I left it slightly curved, just for the sake of having a shape that I wanted it to arrive at, which would be not fully flat, right? So you could do it flat if you want and have it arrive, but it's just easier for me to do it this way. Now, if you go to the open shape key, the open shape key is the curtain. Well, it's open, right? So you opened it. That means you slid all these rings around, to tighten up and close the curtain, right? So now doing this was quite tedious, but it's very predictable. You could there's a few ways you could animate these rings and try to get them to follow where they're supposed to be each time. But it's a bit tedious. Like you could leave them on an array and animate the distance of the array. You could have them follow a curve and animate the offset. There's a number of things you could do. But I was getting frustrated with those ways because they weren't 100% accurate, and I had to go in and make a lot of keyframes to make it work. So this one is a little more predictable as you move it out. They stay fairly much where they need to stay because they're all following the same exact shape key. So, but to do this, I had to actually take each ring and actually physically move it into position back to where I wanted it. But scaling won't work because that'll just squish up these, if you scale it, it'll squish these things up like that, which is not what you want. You don't want them to be scaled in like that. But you can scale this. That's how I got this shape. So if I scale it like this, right, scale it on the X, I can scale this in from where it was, right? And then I just came back and I lined up these rings to line up where they were in the same position on the mesh, right? It's tedious, but it's a lot more accurate and it's simple. So I like simple and accurate and at the expense of tedium pretty much most of the time. Maybe I'm just a maniac and I don't mind sitting here moving each one of these rings one by one. But the end result was, now that I have it, I can animate it all I want and it's completely accurate. I can do whatever I want. So that's worth it to me. Save hassle, save tedious settings on another way to animate these to make sure they stay in the same place because the curves don't line up, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, so it eliminates all of that. So you have the simple shape key here, and that is you got the open shape key. Then you have the drag shape key. Now I did that on the open, on the closed version because it's going to be that way by default anyway, but anyway, it works best. So basically what it's doing is you make a new shape key. Now you're basically have the basis shape key that you're now editing with drag. And so I just kind of went through with the proportional edit tool, right? And I just simply dragged this back a little bit and then put this back to, active element is fine. As you can drag this from whatever, and you can, it's like a sculpt tool. You can also sculpt this if you want. You can go into sculpt mode and do similar things. To do that, you have to have this set at 1, and then you have to have this shape key set at 1, which it isn't. So anyway, that's a whole other thing. You can use sculpt mode. You can look into that. But anyways, I just used edit mode with proportional edit on so that I could play with the shape. And again, like I said, you can do this shape whatever you want. You can have it rotated, stretched out, do whatever kind of funky shapes you want. I kept it fairly simple. Okay. So anyway, so that's the drag shape key. All right, and then the follow shape key. Oh, looks like I misspelled that. Anyway, so the follow shape key is basically just it swinging forward. And again, I kind of moved everything a little bit forward, but mostly on the ends here to kind of show it sort of swinging forward, right? So, and then the sway in and sway out are what you kind of would expect they would be. They are based on the closed again. And if I look at this view, you can see that sway in is moving in towards the center. Excuse me, wrong view there. Here we go. This is moving in towards the center, and sway out is moving out, right? And so then each one of these shape keys, I have a rig here, right? And each one of these shape keys gets a driver. So let's look at the open shape key. Obviously, this one has no driver. It doesn't have any animation. The open shape key has a driver, and it's animated in reverse. In other words, I animated it at 1, which is open, and then as the animation goes, it's going to close. Of course, if you wanted it to start closed first, it would be 0, and then you just animate it to 1, and it would open. That's the way you wanted to do it, like opening the curtains. I did it the other way. I just did it starting open and then close them. So that's just simply a choice you can make either way. All right, so now let's look at that driver. So the driver, if you look at that, here, let's do it in the other. Let's go to the driver's editor. It's a little bit better. Okay, so the driver's editor, you can see here, it's pretty simple. I use the default settings usually, and for these kind of things, it gets me what I want. There's other things you can do with this, but for the simple setups, usually this is enough. So by default, if you look at here, it already gives you a variable and then a figure in there. So let's actually, just for the sake of education, let's do this. Let's add another shape key here. From that, yeah, let's add another shape key, and now I'm going to add a driver, and then I'm going to open in driver's editor. So it's fairly simple. So by default, you get this variable, a plus, and then a figure here, right? And so what I want to do is I want to have it driven by the armature, and the bone I want to have it driven by, in this case, let's say move, right? So it's going to be driven by the move bone. And I want local space, because you might want to move this whole rig somewhere, and you don't want it moving when you move it through space. So local, that means local to the parent of the rig, or to the origin of the rig. And if the rig moves, if the base of the rig moves, or the rig itself moves through space, it won't activate this. And so in this case, you can see I got it lined up on the X. So I want the X location. And then this value here, I pretty much just leave it at default, but I just changed a couple of things. You can play with this value here. And I usually, for these, I usually use the times signal. So just keeping it like that. And then the shape key will move if I move the move bone. All right, so I'm not going to do that right here. So there's nothing on the shape key, so it's not going to do anything. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that shape key. So that's explaining the driver. So let's go back to move and go to open driver's editor. So now you see I added a value of ×3. So it just means that when you move this along the x-axis, you know, if it's calculated in meters, if you move it 1 meter times 3, kind of a thing, right? So it's just taking this value, adding some math to it, and moving that shape key from 0 to 1, right? So which means it doesn't really require a whole lot of movement. You could set that value lower. I just kind of come up with a medium value. So let's look at this. See, I didn't move it that much to get it to go all the way around, right? It doesn't really move very far. If you set smaller values, it would require further movement on that. And if it makes sense to you, if you want it to feel like it, you have to move it as far as you're moving this, right? You could set it to 1. You could set it to any value you want that feels natural to you. So I didn't do that. I just set it there so I could move it a little bit, right? Okay, so that's how that's set up. It's just a simple way to drive the shape key with a rig, right? So now in the same rig, so I can have the same action and be animating everything as I want it, just like a character face or something. I could have expressions all tied into the same rig, right? So these are just kind of like expressions on a face. You know, you're going to blink, you're going to smile, you're going to do all these things. So in this case, here's some animation I have on the sway. So I kind of have it swaying forward, or dragging back first, and then as it turns the corner, right, I figure there's some friction here, and that's locking these up a little bit in space, because they're not going to go as quickly around that corner because they got friction, right? And as it does that, then it kind of follows through. As the curtain has the same inertia, right? So it kind of follows through, going through the curve after it goes through that curve, because these got frictions and slowed down, but the inertia is still going on the curtain. And then now it starts dragging again by the time it gets to the next curve. And then the opposite happens, because when it gets to this curve, it's dragging more, right, a little bit. And then now I'm going to start follow through again as it goes through the curve, because of the inertia, right? And then it starts dragging again as it gets pulled forward. And then as it comes through the curve again, now it's follow through again. It's following through like that. right? And then now it's dragging again. And then when it stops, everything stops except the curtain still needs to follow through a little bit. So it follows through like that. So it's just understanding how dynamics work, right? And then also for extra realism and have it feel less, stiff, I added this sway in and out, right? So as I'm moving through the animation, I'm just simply swaying it in and out to make it look like there's some, sort of cast off energy, if you will. I'm not sure what you call that in physics, but as there's energy applied to this, it needs to sort of dissipate. And if it can't all dissipate with the sway or drag, it'll find a way to kind of move the curtain to sort of let the energy fall off, so to speak, right? And especially when it stops, boom, there, it's going to sway in and out a little bit. Just kind of the way things work. If you look at things in the real world, you see them do these kind of things. So that is the one caveat of this, the one drawback of this method is that you have to understand animation and physics. It's not going to be automatic. You're going to have to actually design that into your animation, right? So the thing is, this works and it's predictable, and it does rely on you understanding some of the physics, but the setup is fairly simple. The drivers are simple. The idea of having a rig drive the shape keys is really a tried and true method for driving shape keys, used all the time with face rigs and other things. And like I say, it works. It isn't 100% accurate to dynamics, but if it's believable at a distance, or if it's believable enough for what you need, then that's good enough. And like I said, I'll always go for predictability and stability in my rigs and in my setup over 100% realistic. I will take a little bit of hit on realistic and go with something that's predictable and doesn't hold up my entire pipeline as we're trying to tweak this thing forever to get it to look right. So that's my method. That's the way it is.